37. A panel of experts on land grab in the Americas. Foreigners are buying our land. In 2009, the World Bank raised an alarm that foreign companies were on a spending binge, buying up millions of hectares of land in developing countries. In that year alone, 45 million hectares had been bought, which was 10 times more than the previous decade. Moreover, the report suspected that two-thirds of these controversial land grabs had been in Africa, where critics say public and government institutions offered a weak defense against Western multinationals and state companies. Even the World Bank appeared at that time to be deeply perturbed by the morality that was reflected in this global land rush. Here's the big question. Were you aware of this event? Did it ever appear on your radar screen? You may say no and give a very reasonable excuse that you were not following such world events closely. I wish to offer to you a more profound reason. You were too busy living in ordinary time to have noticed. You see, the tidal waves that keep underdevelopment on our shores occur when most of the world continues to live in ordinary time. There were folks who did notice this and quite rightly sought to do something about it. The FAO ROLAC, which is Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean, was so concerned that they called together a panel of high-level experts in Santiago, Chile in 2011 to review the process of concentration and foreignization of land in Latin America and the Caribbean. I was invited to be part of this 20-person panel, which comprised professionals from Spanish-speaking Americas, Portuguese-speaking Brazil, and English-speaking Caribbean. Most of the presentations in the forum were made in Spanish and Portuguese, but we had summaries before us, so I could easily read them in Spanish while following the speakers. The language turned out not to be much of a barrier, because many of the participants also spoke and understood English, having either attended universities in America or Europe, or having collaborated with English-speaking specialists. Panel discourse was held on November the 14th and 15th of 2011. I made my presentation in English, but it was dutifully translated into Spanish and published in the proceedings of the panel entitled Dinámicos del Mercado de la Tierra en América Latina y el Caribe, Concentración y Extranjeración, FAO 2012. I must give credit to the FAO for more correctly framing this issue. The concept of land grab is more a press hype of a complex situation. The issue in Spanish is identified as land concentration and land alienation to foreign interests. Note the marriage of concentration of land with alienation to an external economic interest. The term land grabbing had emerged on the international stage within the context of a spike in global food prices in 2007 and 2008. The initial media spotlight was on such countries like Saudi Arabia and South Korea, potentially acquiring vast areas of land overseas to grow food for their own people, amidst a fear of a global food scarcity. And international development think tanks helped to reinforce the framing of the scenario that way. Today, After so many laws requiring foreigners to obtain a license before purchasing land in our jurisdiction, we in the Caribbean are finally gaining a better understanding of what was really happening. Some of the facts regarding who are the grabbers, the hunger connection, rates of land acquisition, what is being grown, and the attendant pushback are all detailed in a picture in page 199. Land grabbing is essentially the capturing of power to control land and other associated resources like water, minerals, or forests in order to impound the benefits from its use. This became my issue as it infringed on our effort to fix the unconventional forms of access to land-based wealth that were so common in the Caribbean islands. So I cannot tell you why I was chosen to join the high-level panel of experts on land dynamics in Latin America and the Caribbean. There was supposed to be another English-speaking delegate from Guyana, but he did not make it to the session. I myself have never pursued a practice of building my professional network nor lobbying contacts to my advantage. I just receive unsolicited invitations and respond as my work schedule and my convictions would allow me to. Our history of land grabbing. I was pleased to be part of this effort, however, because I needed to explain to colleagues in Latin America and also in international organizations like the FAO that land relations in the Caribbean were born out of the most intense period of land grabbing in the 17th and 18th centuries. Presenting the case of Trinidad and Tobago, I started out with the historic precedents of the cedula, which offered land to settlers with their slaves. I was keen to explain how the colonial framework for land ownership morphed into a more recent attempt at mega-farm solutions. In our case, the inheritors of private estates either sought to move their large acreages into alternative and more lucrative land uses, such as housing development, hotel establishment, quarrying, etc., or in the case of corporate landowners, to sell their properties to the state. Lest someone forgets, I wish to commit to our collective memory the efforts of the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in 2008. While professing not to abandon the land rental market approach, government decided to utilize its expansive agricultural land holdings to establish large technology-driven farms and other large-scale agribusinesses. This was one of the many attempts to revive our agricultural sector without redressing the stains of slavery and indentureship that continue to brand careers in this sector as being inferior. In Trinidad, the government leased large tracts of land to 4 large companies. There were Supermix Feeds of Trinidad, Technology Farms Limited of Trinidad, Two Brothers Corporation of Guyana, and Caribbean Chemicals Limited of Trinidad. The estates that were tossed into the grab bag for privileged access by these large corporations were as follows: Jerningham, 108 acres for vegetable crops; Edinburgh, 354 acres for vegetable crops; Orange Grove, 100 acres for vegetable crops; Carney, 100 acres for root crops and rice; La Gloria, 364 acres for mixed farming and livestock; Montjaloux, 417 acres for integrated farming, livestock and aquaculture; Picton Estate, 1,201 acres for livestock, tree crops and root crops; and Chagaramas, 200 acres, operated with assistance from the government of Cuba for root crops, rice production, mixed farming, livestock, and integrated farming. This 2008 initiative was expected to impact food supplies for primary consumption as well as feedstock for the agro-processing and food manufacturing subsectors. I am writing in 2021. Did I miss this success by any chance? Some of our academics appeared to believe that the logic for corporate land involvement was a new brainwave of Minister Pigott. It always sounds like smart politics, not smart economics, when government ministers emphasized that they would not be financing these projects, but only providing state lands to the investors. The investors were responsible for all infrastructure works such as roads, irrigation, and other works. They were just pretending to be neutral in the land grab. Realism or ideology? There was another more sinister view of this issue. The global land grab represented an embodiment of an ongoing and accelerating change in the meaning and use of land and its associated resources like water. Small-scale, labor-intensive uses like subsistence agriculture were fading and being replaced by large-scale, capital-intensive, resource-depleting uses such as monoculture, raw material extraction, and large-scale hydropower generation. There was very little in this model to shout about as benefiting the development of people. It was the interpretation of the Spanish term extranjerización that linked the extractive local land infrastructure to metropolitan centers of foreign capital. Many of my friends tended to see this position as ideology being challenged by realism. Let me give you an example. When we were working on land administration in Tobago, there were complaints about Germans buying up property and establishing bed and breakfast units. What would happen was the German visitors would pay for a stay in Tobago at these establishments, but to the owners, while the visitor himself was still in Germany. By the time this German visitor arrived in Tobago, his actual expenditures were minimal. Some taxi fares, some food items, and a possible small stipend for someone to come in and clean the place while he was there. How much ideology do you think it takes for the average citizen to realize that the benefits of this type of tourism was as minimal as you can get? But it wasn't the type of tourism that was at fault. It was the land ownership structure that allowed foreigners to appropriate most of the benefits of this tourism. I was very happy that my contribution was translated into Spanish, so that our colleagues in the rest of Latin America would have a reference to how the question is phrased in the Caribbean. More than that, however, it gave me the opportunity in the open discussion to increase the awareness of how the traditional 10 years of family lands, generation lands, and commonage were being assaulted to make way for creating commodities out of some very valuable real estate in our region. To the question of foreignization, I can relay you to an incident I experienced in a town hall meeting I held in the island of Abaco in the Bahamas. A white resident, obviously of foreign extraction, got up and said that if the government was having so much trouble distributing crown lands in Abaco, they didn't need to bring me, a consultant, here. Just give it to the Yacht Owners Association, because we have the capacity to find the best use and the best people for the land. Another person, a black resident, followed that with a complaint that she had applied for crown lands for 5 years, and was tired of seeing others being parachuted, those were her exact words, in front of her and given preferential treatment by government. To be sure that I didn't take the white lady seriously, the administrator of Abaco, over drinks after the session, said to me that one of the guys in the front row leaned over and told him that if he wanted to see a real riot in Abaco, just try doing what that lady just suggested. Scoring the ease of doing business. I had a larger bone to pick, and it was with the World Bank. Some of the participants on the expert panel wished to hold the World Bank responsible for encouraging land grabbing in poor developing countries around the world, using the assumption that the ongoing rural crisis of persistent chronic poverty and widespread hunger was based on a lack of investment. The bank had inadvertently encouraged an upswing in big investor interests in land. Moreover, the bank's thinking was that such investments needed to be large-scale and corporate-controlled in order to be capable of competing on the world scale and gaining success with the increasingly integrated value chain in global food production and distribution. My bone of contention was of a different complexion. The land grab phenomenon, instead of raising alarm concerning the plight of the poor, actually intensified the bank's search for promoting easier access for investors. The bank started to use its enterprise surveys to rank countries in terms of an ease of doing business score. Soon, we were faced with two new indicators, namely, the ease of doing business ranking as a measure that compared countries with each other, and the ease of doing business scores, which benchmarked government regulations with what the bank considered to be best practices. Now, I had a problem. The World Bank was now using data gained at the enterprise level, and as an enterprise formation specialist, I had to become concerned. The way in which they were collecting, judging, and then presenting the data had nothing to do with whether the enterprises were actually contributing to the economic development of the persons who depended heavily on them for their sustenance. See, most of these criteria were geared towards addressing the complaints of foreign investors in setting up businesses in developing countries. The ease of doing business was a judgment call, not an objective analysis of business regulations. A nation's ranking on the index of the World Bank was based on the average of 10 sub-indices, and let me tell you what they were. Starting a business, procedures, time, cost, and minimum capital to open a new business. Construction permits, procedures, time, and cost to build a warehouse. Getting electricity, procedures, time, and cost required for a business to obtain a permanent electricity connection for a newly constructed warehouse. Registering property, procedures, time, and cost to register commercial real estate. Getting credit, strength of legal rights index, depth of credit information index. Protecting investors, indices to the extent of disclosure, the extent of director liability, and ease of shareholder suits. Paying taxes, number of taxes paid, hours per year spent preparing tax returns, and total tax payable as a share of gross profit. Trading across borders, the number of documents, cost, and time necessary to export and import. Enforcing contracts, procedures, time, and cost to enforce a debt contract. And resolving insolvency, the time, cost, and recovery rate under a bankruptcy proceeding. Now, do you see or hear anything here about paying workers a livable wage or intensifying the labor content of new firms from the local unemployment pool. I was very interested in the part dealing with registering property, procedures, time, and cost to register commercial real estate. Many countries were eager to adopt these measures as internal guides, especially since they were more often than not expected to lead to successful financing. We had many officials in the Caribbean buying into policies that will, quote, decrease the cost of doing business in their country, without quite understanding how that was subverting any legitimate protection of local enterprises struggling to buffer themselves from open global competition. It was another strategy, like the one in Abaco for Crown Lands, of parachuting persons to the head of the line. This talk even persists today, in spite of the fact that on September the 16th, 2021, the World Bank finally abandoned this approach with the following announcement, I quote, "The World Bank announced today it has discontinued publication of the Doing Business Report, DBR, following publication of internal audits and reviews into the report that revealed serious ethical concerns of data manipulation, shattering trust in the rankings." This was not simply a judgment call. It was the worst type, subject to corruption with global implications.